maybe you have seen him. And then again, maybe not. Because for me, I never experienced it, heard about it, knew about it, even thought that it existed growing up. It was only long after I left home and had moved out west with Mark as he served in the military. He lies on a pile of newspapers outside of a shop doorway. Or maybe outside of a mall or some other well-traveled location. Sometimes you'll see him covered with a rough blanket. And he might even have a scruffy old dog with him to help him feel safe. People walk past him. People step over him. He looks up. Sometimes he asks for help. But mostly he just looks with desperate, haunted eyes. He wasn't there when we were growing up. I didn't know about it. But he is there now. He is in all of our cities. Our big cities, our small cities, and even in our small towns. There is no escaping him anymore. And as you look on or as you pass by and there are other people around you, you can hear the voices as they say, well, it's his own fault. He chose this life. You know, there are agencies that will help him. He just needs to get up and get a job. If we give him money, he's only going to spend it on drugs or alcohol. Stay away from him. He might be violent. Some of the bigger places, the police might move him on, exporting the problem somewhere else. But he'll be back for someone like him. There's always more to take his place. They camp under bridges. They live in cardboard boxes, and sometimes right out in the open. They're on the edges of large cities, small cities, and our small rural towns. Their reasons for being there are as numerous as the stars in the sky. Yet how quickly are we to blame them and turn away from their need? And even when they don't come into our direct realm, we still see them because the television brings it home to us. So the truth is, we all know Lazarus. He is our neighbor. Some of us may be rich, well-dressed, and well-fed, and we'll walk right past him, even without noticing. Other of us are maybe not so rich, not so finely clothed or fed, but compared to Lazarus, we are really well off. mind Lazarus eating the scraps from his table. Why would he? It was only bread. Because in that time there were no knives or forks or napkins. Food was eaten with the hand. And in very wealthy houses, the hands were cleaned by wiping them on chunks of bread and tossing them away. That's what Lazarus was waiting for there at the door. So the rich man had no problem sharing his bread, but he couldn't see. He didn't see Lazarus there. His sin was not that he was rich, but that he did not take notice of his neighbor's need. He was too absorbed in himself to see the man who was sitting on his stoop. How often have each and every one of us done the same thing? I'm convinced that all people want is to be noticed. Particularly now that we have spent so much time separated from our communities and from each other over the last 2.5 years. People want to be noticed. We need to know that somebody cares during our difficult times. When you're feeling lonely, there is absolutely nothing like a phone call from a friend who says, I just called to say hello. Or when we're feeling down, a simple question from your neighbor that says, are you okay? Of course you're not okay, but because someone took notice and asked, your spirit is lifted just a little. Yet how often do we weather the storms of life all by ourselves and on our own? We've been there. Every one of us has been there. At one time or another, we have all had something in our life that was weighing us down. And we know how it feels to be noticed when our world is caving in all around us. Yet how often have we failed to notice someone else whose world is caving in? When was the last time you called a lonely friend or checked up on one of your neighbors? Do we offer that bottle of water to the drunk that's slouched against the wall, or do we step to the other side of the street so we can avoid him? Do we see Lazarus sitting right at our gate, or do we just walk by day in and day out, not seeing him any more than we see the shrubs that line our driveway? The sad part of this is there are systems in place now that make it easier for us to ignore our neighbor in need, even when they are right there in front of us. In several locations around the country, the big cities have installed brightly colored and beautifully painted parking meters. These meters are set up to give people a way to make donations that will help the homeless without actually having to give money directly to the homeless. This city is responsible for those meters and takes the money and gives it to the agencies that serve the homeless. And don't get me wrong, that is a really, really good thing. I think it's a great idea. But when we begin to engage in this out-of-touch giving, we forget those people who are leaning up against those meters and that they are real. And that very often all they're looking for is simple human interaction, much more than a meal or a soft bed. They want somebody to acknowledge that they're important. If we do something like drop money in donation meters, but ignore the people right before us, we do them a disservice. We are no better than the rich man who brushed by Lazarus each and every day. Jesus tells us there's nothing more important than that you would notice your neighbor in need and you would love him. There are plenty of times in the Gospels when Jesus preaches a very tough message about turning away from riches and making ourselves poor in order to follow him. And we could look again at the message in our study of the text today, but that's not the point Jesus is trying to make. Jesus is telling us, you've heard it from Moses and you've heard it from the prophets, and you have heard it from me numerous times. If you are going to follow me, you have to help people in need. You have to feed the hungry and clothe the naked. You have to help the widow and the orphan. You have to offer shelter to the homeless and comfort to the grieving. You have to visit the imprisoned and offer forgiveness to those who have wronged you. And to do any of those things, it means you start by noticing the needs of the people around you. The call from Jesus in this passage is simple. When we see someone in need, it is our calling as Christians to help them however we can. I'm going to share a story I heard from a fellow pastor about his time in seminary in Washington, D.C. If you've ever been to college, you know what it's like to be a student. Money is pretty tight. They didn't have a lot of money, and they were in school full-time, and they worked part-time to offset some of their schooling. But they had a little pocket change. And many times, late in the evening, several of them would gather together and head to the closest 7-Eleven for a Slurpee. They had to walk several blocks to get there. They grabbed their drinks and drink them up as they walked back to campus. But that's not really the point of the story. The point is, inevitably, there would be someone in the parking lot soliciting money from customers as they went in and out. And on the rare occasion that they saw nobody at the store, they would certainly pass them on the streets. He went on to say that sometimes when they had a little extra pocket change, they would pool their money and they would invite the person into the store for a hot dog or a package of crackers. And as they did this and on their trips, they began to see familiar faces in the neighborhood. One in particular he mentioned was the lady who slept in a huddled mass in the bus stop on the corner that was opposite the store. And as the weather began to get colder, it was apparent to them that she didn't have a blanket or a warm coat. And as students, they certainly could not invite her back to the dorms, nor could they afford to keep her fed. But at the suggestion of one of his friends, they all got together and made her a blanket. It was t-shirt material on the inside, and the outside layer was waterproof, and they made sure and filled the inside with extra thick batting so that it was good and warm. And on their next trip to the store, they stopped at the bus stop and gave her the blanket. Now, in the big picture, it wasn't much. It wasn't a roof over her head. It wasn't security. But it's what they could do. And they made a difference to that woman because they noticed her. They showed her compassion. He goes on to say that throughout the rest of his time in school, they did this for others in the neighborhood. The people that were right there at their doorstep. What those people needed more than anything was to be noticed and to be you teach us